issue that is very dear to my heart, which is clean air in Salt Lake Valley and beyond. For those of you that don't know me, I am Michael Cundick. I am Utah's only Green Party candidate. I'm running for Salt Lake County Mayor this year. And I want to be clear that my guests today on our Clean Air Solutions panel are in no way endorsing me or having their organizations endorse me. But I am very blessed to have gotten to work with both of these wonderful individuals. Both Deeda and Brian Moench have been doing fantastic work here locally for longer than I've even been in the game. Back when I was still touring the country, playing with a rock band and not thinking about how to serve the world through community action, Deeda and Brian have both been on the front lines here in Utah Valley and Salt Lake Valley, making a big difference for our air and our environment. And I'm really grateful that they took time out of their busy schedules today to bring us up to speed, not only on the nature of our air quality problem and the seriousness of it here in the Valley, but also projects they're working on, practical solutions from the bottom up, from the top down, and what it's going to take to have a livable future in our valley. So thank you very much, Deeda and Brian, for joining me today. And thank you, everybody who's tuning in to listen. Please, if you're willing, share this live video, invite your friends, and also feel free to leave comments and questions throughout the live stream so that we can really get to the nitty-gritty, figure out what the heck we're dealing with, and how we're going to make for a better future here in Salt Lake Valley. So thank you, Deeda and Brian, for coming on the Clean Air Solutions panel here for the next hour. Thank you both.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah. I think it would be great to start with letting people know just a little more about who you are and maybe projects you're currently working on. So why don't you introduce yourself, maybe how you found yourself in the environmental or air quality advocacy space, and a little bit about current projects and elements that you're engaged with. Maybe let's start with you, Deeda.
Well, I've been an environmentalist since I was a small child. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and full disclosure, I'm 58. So in the 60s, I could see these huge plumes of horrible black billowing smoke, and I could smell and taste the air, and it was pollution coming from the steel mills in Gary, Indiana. And I knew, even at a very young age, that that was not right. So as a college student, as a high school student, I've always engaged in activism. And when I moved to Utah in 1980, because of the magnificent place that this is, because of the amazing opportunities that we have to be outside here, I got engaged pretty quickly in working to stop some really bad projects that were proposed back then, like the MX missile, for example, and a nuclear waste dump site that was proposed for just outside of Canyonlands National Park. And anyway, long story short, I've been an activist and an organizer my whole life. I had a career in government briefly. I was elected to the Salt Lake City Council in the 90s, and I worked for Mayor Anderson. But I've worked on a whole range of issues, from, civil rights and social and economic justice to environmental health issues. And what I'm finding now at this point, at age 58, is that these things are very interconnected. And so my current work is as a lead organizer with the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition, which has huge potential. If this proposed polluting port is built, it has a huge potential to really destroy the air quality in our valley and our quality of life.
Thank you, Deeda, for working so hard on that issue. Brian, I would love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your background and current projects and how you found yourself to be such a lead character in the fight for clean air here in the valley.
Thank you, Michael. I was born here in Salt Lake and raised by wolves in the bushes of Temple Square. No, that's a little bit of hyperbole. My involvement in the environment probably dates back to about 20 years, excuse me, probably, yeah, about 21 years ago, when a dear family member of mine got cancer. And I helped her study for probably 6 or 7 weeks what the medical literature said about what was the best treatment for her. And we found out actually that what was really the best treatment was not what initially the doctors recommended, although when we reviewed all the medical research, they agreed with us. But one of the things that I found out in that medical or that review of the medical research was that 80 to 90% of cancer is environmentally provoked. Now, in that 80 to 90% are things that we voluntarily expose ourselves to, like cigarette smoking is your own personal environmental disaster. Basically, everything's an environmental element except for genetic influences. And so the bottom line is only a small part of cancer is genetically caused. Most of it is environmentally caused, and a lot of that is involuntary environmental exposures. So my interest smoldered for quite a while, but then about 13 years ago, in the middle of one of our classic winter inversions, we had pollution continue to build up with no break at all from any storms for about 6 weeks. And I started talking to my colleagues, and I said, nobody's talking about this in the public arena, what kind of a health hazard this really represents. And quite frankly, I didn't know, and my colleagues didn't know. And so we kind of formed an ad hoc study group of about 8 physicians, and we decided, well, we're going to find out. And then we reconvened about 2 months later, and we were so stunned by what we had found in the medical literature that we decided we had to call up the governor, who was John Huntsman at the time, and we said, Governor Huntsman, we need to talk to you so that you can understand what kind of a public health hazard our air pollution really is. And he agreed to see us for 25 minutes, and he ended up spending an hour and a half with us and proceeded to make air pollution one of the top 3 issues of his administration. We've been going pretty much full-time ever since then and expanded our organization from 9 doctors to about 450 and about 3,000 members of the lay public. During that time, obviously, we've become engaged in a lot of political battles, even though we really didn't want to be. Unfortunately, most of our environmental problems are matters of politics, and certainly even more so the solution to our environmental problems are also matters of politics. And so, despite the fact that we really would prefer not to be involved in politics, there's really no way to effectively bring to the table or bring to the public all of the information that we feel is important without getting engaged in politics. So we've been heavily engaged in virtually every political issue that touches on environmental protection in the state of Utah. And we've had actually states from around the country contact us asking for help and consultation on various environmental problems, even in other countries. So we're very busy on multiple fronts, but we're still focused primarily on what's going on in Utah.
Yeah, I appreciate that the depth of your experience, and I'm grateful for your time today. I liked what you said about having this kind of whether we like it or not. You know, we are politically engaged, even in our disengagement. That's kind of a political choice in these days, because a lot of what goes on in politics affects the quality of our water, affects the quality of our air and our soils, and the way that we take care of one another. And it's kind of an unavoidable fact. And I think that this year in particular, there's been a lot of interesting wins from my perspective, being a big fan of like food sovereignty, growing food, working together as neighborhoods to grow food. We saw a huge interest right as COVID was showing its head a lot in March, April. We had a lot of people come together, and I saw a lot of interest in gardening, a lot of tools getting bought, soil getting worked, and I thought that was just great. But it also seems like with this long summer and this difficult day and age that we're in, it's hard to remember just how dependent we are on a healthy environment and a healthy living world around us, in order to have the kind of social and cultural peace and prosperity that's needed. We can't build that on a foundation of pollution and dis-ease. My campaign slogan is "In service to life," and all of the personal decisions I make, as well as the issues that I get involved in, are directly informed by that ethic. Is it going to lead us with the quality of health that we deserve for ourselves and our future generations? And so I think this is a good reminder for people to kind of re-educate. Let's make sure we understand how air pollution works in this valley and just how important it is to not sideline it or put it on the back burner. We got to be aware of this, and then we've got to build a solution-focused mindset around it and continually get engaged to make sure that the world is healing and not getting worse and worse. I think, Brian, it might help if you'd be willing, with your background as a doctor and from a scientific perspective, maybe spend 5-10 minutes breaking it down for us. What are we really? How bad is it, the air quality that we face in Salt Lake Valley and beyond?
Well, the last few years, when I give lectures to any sort of audience, especially the public, I've focused on trying to dispel what I think are a handful of myths that people have about air pollution. And in fact, these myths are prevalent not only in the public, but they're also very prevalent amongst policymakers and politicians. So trying to dispel these myths is an exercise not only to educate the public, but also improve public policy. That doesn't mean that anybody in the legislature will pay attention to this. But nonetheless, we're going to keep hammering it until this becomes common knowledge. The first myth I want to try and dispel is that there's no safe level of air pollution. And think of it this way: there's no safe number of cigarettes that a person can smoke. As a matter of fact, think of it this way: research has shown that smoking one cigarette a day is nearly half as much risk to your health as smoking an entire pack. That same hyperbolic relationship between air pollution concentration from cigarettes and air pollution concentration in the community and the public health consequences, the graphs are the same. They overlap almost exactly. So the point of that being is such thing as air that's too clean. Even when it seems clean and everybody thinks it's clean, green, and the numbers are very low, all of the medical research indicates that there is still damage to public health, even at very lowest levels that we can measure. So what that means is we should not be satisfied saying that, we meet federal health standards with regard to air pollution. Therefore, if our modeling suggests we can bring in a new source of pollution and we'll still meet the federal standards, then everything's okay. No, that is absolutely not the case. The second myth I want to try and dispel is that it only affects, quote, people who are in sensitive groups. Everybody is in a sensitive group if they have a heart and a set of lungs. And so, yes, there are some people who are more impacted by our air pollution than others. The elderly, the very young, pregnant mothers with babies in utero, they are certainly more susceptible to significant impacts from air pollution, but everyone is affected, whether or not they have symptoms. It accelerates the aging process such that even if you ever contract or die from a disease that is related to air pollution, your life is still being cut short. In fact, we estimate that the average person probably loses about 2 years of life expectancy because of the air pollution, the chronic air pollution along the Wasatch Front. The third thing is there are important genetic differences in the susceptibility that one person may have compared to another. You can have two people each other who have the exact same biologic profile, but they may have genetic differences in their susceptibility, and so one of them may be much more likely to have a bad outcome from air pollution than another. So we like we like politicians to think of that particular property as reason to not be satisfied with our air quality if they themselves don't feel like they're being harmed or don't have any symptoms. That doesn't mean that other people aren't being harmed. The fourth concept is that even short-term air pollution matters. Unfortunately, we all have this tendency to think that we have an air pollution problem, a storm blows in, the air clears up, everybody's relieved, the sky's blue, and we think everything's fine. Unfortunately, inside your body, that's not what's going on, because the air pollution that you're breathing during whatever event you're talking about is still causing biologic inflammation. And in fact, if you think of the little tiny air pollution particles that we inhale, that literally end up inside our body, including contaminating every one of our critical organs. The air pollution particles you inhaled in January can still be inside your body in April, still be biologic damage because of their presence. In fact, some of those particles may never leave. So even short pollution matters, and that correlates with the fifth myth I want to dispel, and that is averages don't tell the whole story. For years, we heard from our politicians that our air pollution average is probably comparable to other cities of similar size in the country. And while that is true, averages do not tell the whole story. Think of what's going on in California right now. The wildfires that they are experiencing that are literally suffocating millions of people, their average air pollution is probably not going to change an awful lot from a couple of weeks of severe air pollution. But that doesn't mean that the air pollution impacts right now in California and Oregon and Washington aren't profound and will have long-term implications. The sixth myth I want to dispel, or principle I want to try and get people to understand, is timing is critical. If you're a person who has some atherosclerotic plaque in one of your coronary arteries, and you're on the verge of a heart attack, an air pollution event, like say the air pollution we're experiencing today via the California wildfires, that may be just enough to tip you over the edge and cause that heart attack. So the timing of the exposure can be critical, and that is especially true of babies in utero. We know that the most critical time of development for a human being while they're in their mother's womb, while the organs are being developed. And so a week's worth of air pollution to an individual who is like 12 weeks gestation in their mother's womb can have lifelong consequences, and it's far different than the impact on, say, a 50-year-old male, where they have the same sort of week's worth of air pollution exposure. Another principle is that not all particulate air pollution is created equal. It gets very frustrating for us to look at statements from our state agencies and our federal agencies equating PM2.5 as equally toxic regardless of the source. And PM2.5, in case some of your readers or some of your listeners need to have that explained, that's particulate matter 2.5 microns in size and smaller. The toxicity of those particles can vary greatly depending on the source. So whether or not it's from a tailpipe or a smokestack or a pile of wood burning or a cigarette, there is a different type of toxic profile to each one of those pollution sources. And I won't go into it right now, but you'd be surprised which of those sources are in fact the most toxic. And then lastly, it's important to remember that microenvironments matter. Not all pollution is equally distributed throughout the community. If you are next to someone who burns wood for heat, can be exposed 100 times more pollution than what is experienced in the rest of the community. And that particular principle is very relevant to the discussion of the inland port, because as it is being planned, this concentration of pollution sources, diesel trucks, diesel trains, air traffic, etc., that pollution concentration will disproportionately affect the communities that live near the inland port, and they will have significantly more health impacts than the rest of the community. Not that the rest of the Wasatch Front is going to get off any sort of adverse impact from the inland port, but certainly those people who are fortunate enough to live near this concentration of pollution are going to be the most severely impacted. So it's important to remember all these different features. These kinds of qualities of our air pollution problem are not talked about very often, and I want to dispel what the public may think about our air pollution by diving into some of these different aspects that people aren't necessarily aware of.
Yeah. That was a super helpful breakdown. And I just want to say thank you for being a big part of bringing air quality to the legislative level and to really bring the public awareness up to par. I know we're not out of the woods. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's thanks to there's a lot of credit is due for the amount of hard work you've been putting in to make sure that Governor Herbert and our legislator has been prioritizing it as much as they have.
Well, let me just say one other thing with regard to that. We had a really lengthy series of strategy meetings back in 2007 with the help of one of our legislators to try and decide what would be the most effective route for our public advocacy. And we were advised by some key legislators to take our message directly to the public. Don't try and schmooze with the legislators in back rooms. Let the public understand this problem and let them put the pressure on the legislature. We actually predicted it would take us 10 years to get the public educated about the problem, and I think we actually accomplished that much sooner than that. The public is on board. They get it. They want to breathe clean air. We have not made this the second stage, if you will, of translating that public awareness into real legislative action.
Yeah.
Thus, very poor decisions like the inland port.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about this polluting port. It's been very near and dear to my heart. My wife is about a month away from our first son and first baby, and to think about just how massive and how polluting this project is really, really bothers me. It's been something I've been trying my best to show up for and support ever since the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition began. Before we dive into that, though, I want to kind of reflect on a couple things that you mentioned here, Brian. It was just about a little over 3 years ago that the water protectors of Standing Rock, the indigenous folks out there on that Sioux land, came together and said, enough's enough. We don't want this pipeline to go underneath our river. And a lot of activists and people that are focused on healing the earth and care about that caught wind. And of course, it became this global movement to help support this tribe in their battle. And when we were in their orientation out there, I went out with a group of Utahns. They said that if there is something in your own backyard that is a threat to the future generations, bring this energy back home. And so I connected with activist Carl Moore, a Hopi Chimawebe Native activist, and we decided to start the SLC Air Protectors together to try to bring a little bit of that direct action, people-powered feeling to the clean air battle. And I can't tell you how frustrating. It's one of those issues that's just so huge. And we talk about, till we're red in our face, public transit needs to be improved. We want to pollute less. We want more electric vehicles and electric infrastructure. We want more local sourcing that doesn't require so much heavy industry to promote, and, improve. There's all these little building things and life habit things, and it starts to feel like it's all on the consumer, right? And then it's all up to the little individual that you're the one causing the air problem. But we both know a lot of it has to do with the heavy industry, and it has to do with the legislative decisions. And it feels like for any step forward from the public day-to-day habits, we've now taken like 30 steps back with the formation and the beginning of this Utah inland port, which is something I really hope people get a good education on today and find some good ways to stand up against. Now, I don't want to say that individual action is meaningless in the face of such a difficult trial. In fact, I think that sometimes we get really obsessed with deciding that we've got to prove, we have to like conquer an enemy, right? And there has to be a clear strategic reason to lower our trips or to reduce our air quality impacts. But we also need to remember that we are in ongoing relationship with the living earth, and we need to do things from a place of love as well as a place of practicality, in my opinion. And I think when you really love the planet around you, you're going to find more and more harmonious ways to live within your privilege and within your ability to do so. And so I'm not trying to say this to be discouraging, but yeah, for all of us that care about the air, that have been working hard on the air, like Brian and so many people in our community, this inland port deal is a massive setback. And really discouraging to see happening. And I think it'd be a good time to transition to Deeda for a little bit, who's been really spearheading the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition, and kind of dive a little into what's going on with that, maybe lay some of the baselines about what the heck this thing is, and then bring us up to speed, especially after this COVID kind of period of months. Bring us up to speed. You know, what's going on there, Deeda?
And I'm going to go grab my power cord and plug my computer in while Deeda's
Do
doing
it.
Right
Do it,
back.
Brian. No problem at all.
So the Utah Inland Port Authority was created by the legislature in 2018. And the scheme here is that they want to take the 16,000 acres, about 7,000 of which is adjacent to some really critical wetlands and is itself wildlife habitat currently, and turn it into a giant freight transfer and warehousing facility that our estimates show could bring as many as 70,000 new diesel truck trips into our communities per day, 70,000 per day, and 155,000 additional car trips. And after listening to what Brian just said, I mean, like, that's untenable. If we do that, we won't be able to live here comfortably, safely, in any kind of healthy way. Our quality of life will be vastly diminished. So what these developers want to do is take this undeveloped land, it's about 6,000 acres, that's north of I-80, and to orient people, it's north of I-80 and it's west of the International Center and the airport, and fill it with warehouse upon warehouse. And unfortunately, some of the developers, the property owners, are in a partnership with Salt Lake City's redevelopment agency. So Salt Lake City residents right now are in a position where we're subsidizing this development. The developers, one of whom is Rio Tinto, made it quite clear that they couldn't do this without a public assist, without a public subsidy. So it's a pretty disastrous proposal. But the good news is that people power makes a difference. People have been rising up since the legislature did this in 2018. And over the last 2.5 years, with your help, Michael, and with Brian's help, and with the help of thousands of other people, and I think we have now in our coalition about 23 different organizations, we're pushing back. We're pointing out the harm. We're considering litigation. We're basically using every tool that we have in our toolkit to stop this thing from happening. Now, what's happened so far is that one group of developers, led by the Colmena Group, have built two new warehouses in this previously undeveloped area for Amazon. And, you know, they're sort of exhibit A of how none of this is sustainable. Like, the city and the Port Authority have said, oh, don't worry, it's going to be a green port, it's going to be sustainable. And that is simply not true. First of all, there are no green ports anywhere in the world, inland or sea. And secondly, there just isn't the technology to accomplish that. And when they, for example, they say, well, we'll electrify some things. Well, how is the energy to electrify coming to the port? Well, it's coming from coal-fired power plants. So, the climate emissions from this thing are potentially enormous. And here we are today and the last week watching neighboring communities on fire in this horrific apocalyptic way that is absolutely attributable to climate change. And yet our leaders are talking about taking our tax dollars and building something that will destroy our air quality and be a giant carbon bomb. It's unconscionable. But the good news is that when people hear about it, they get it, and they're calling on their elected officials to step back from this and stop the debacle before it goes any further.
Yeah. There's so much within that to unpack. And I know that Brian, I think probably just as quickly, didn't miss a beat when he caught up on what's going on with the inland port being announced, was there neck and neck fighting for it. What perspective would you bring to the table about the polluting port, Brian, that might not have been mentioned so far with Deeda here?
Like I said, I was getting my power cable while Deeda talked for the first minute or so. So if any of this is redundant, I apologize. But we were concerned about the prospect of thousands of more semi-trucks in and out of the Salt Lake Valley. We were concerned about what appeared to us to be the high likelihood that there would be at least dozens more fully loaded with commodities, diesel locomotives. Studies have suggested that depending on the exact kind of locomotive and the age of the engine and so forth, a diesel locomotive may put out anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 times more pollution than a single vehicle. So if you add dozens more fully loaded trains in and out of this inland port, that's a substantial additional source of pollution. And then obviously they're putting on more and more traffic. To give you an idea how much pollution an airport can be responsible for, a study was done at LAX a few years ago where researchers concluded that all of the pollution from the air traffic at LAX amounted to half as much pollution as all the cars on all their freeways, and that the pollution concentrated for many miles wind of the LAX airport. So again, that highlights that again we are creating a real pollution traffic. In fact, we call it a health sacrifice zone amongst the communities that are going to be nearby. But when you add up from the air traffic, the locomotives, the diesel trucks, and the diesel engines that transfer these huge boxes from trains, trucks, and back and forth, you're talking about a potential pollution nightmare. And then our concerns were recently validated even more so when one of our the members of our coalition, who's an urban planner, David Shear, and teaches at the University of Utah, he said a methodology. He estimated that if this inland port was fully built out, it would create 70,000 trucks a day in and out of that port, and 150,000 regular passenger vehicles.
Yeah.
In addition to our load right now. Now, in addition to all that, what you're going to see from that is obviously horrendous traffic congestion, and then you're going to see pressure on UDOT to double-decker I-15. Mm-hmm. And so that will transform the entire landscape of the valley into much more heavy industry, much more urban. It will change the nature of our valley aesthetically, disregarding for the moment. So from every single standpoint, this is like a sphere, or I should say, a pollution nightmare in the making. And that doesn't even address what appeared to us a major impetus for the port, which was a means of facilitating more oil and gas and coal extraction out of the state. So it's basically assist to create an even more, a bigger carbon bomb from the state of Utah to the rest of the world.
Yeah. It's been a pretty riotous adventure so far, seeing the public really react to the reality of the inland port. And it feels like there's been perhaps a little bit of a necessary disengagement as we've all been dealing with the measures and the response to the COVID-19 crisis. But prior to that, I don't know if I've ever seen such passionate and engaged and widespread activism. For better or for worse, the people have really spoken up about this one. Maybe either of you that feel called, maybe bring us up to speed about what the public response has been like. I remember showing up at some of the hearings and saying how it in my heart, this is just absolutely unacceptable for the wetlands. Like, what a terrible place to build. I mean, we could go on this all day, but what's the response been like, and do you expect that response to increase? And if so, in what ways?
So we have been meeting on Zoom every single week since things shut down, and we're finding that Zoom is a really good tool for us. We have work teams that are now meeting on Zoom. So I'm happy to say that even though we're all, facing this hardship of a pandemic, the organizing work to stop the polluting port continues, and we're actually stronger and more efficient than we were previously because we have new technological tools we're using. And with regard to showing up at Utah Inland Port Authority board meetings, we're also doing that in a robust way. So they've had 2 meetings so far since the pandemic started, and we have dominated the public comment section of those meetings massively. And there's another opportunity tomorrow. The Utah Inland Port Authority Board is meeting tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. If you go to our Facebook page, Stop the Polluting Port, you will find an event that is show up at the port board meeting and tell them that we do not want to subsidize coal. And there's a link to the board meeting. But at this meeting tomorrow,
can people find the weekly Zoom meetings on the Facebook page as well?
I'll put it up there. To find the easiest way to find the weekly Zoom meetings is to go to stopthepollutingport.org /events to the event tab, and there's always a link to that week's Zoom meeting right there. We're a little hit and miss with getting it on Facebook, but tomorrow is a good opportunity for people to speak out and basically to say that they're opposed to using public money to subsidize the export of fossil fuels. Because what we've learned in the past few weeks is, well, we knew this all along, that the Port Authority wants to create mini ports throughout the state. And in some instances, these mini ports could also are being suggested as using public lands, which is a whole other issue, and it's very disturbing. But for coal export, for transloading facilities for coal, and that's deeply disturbing. It should be disturbing to all of us when we're looking at this climate crisis that we're all facing right now. The last thing in the world we should be doing is using any public money to subsidize things like coal that are going to contribute further to the crisis we're experiencing.
It's to mention what public opinion and sentiment appears to be. The only public poll that I have seen was taken about 6 months after the legislature first dropped this bomb on everybody, basically in the middle of the night. And even back then, which was well before our opposition group was formed, the opposition amongst Salt Lake Valley residents was almost 2-1 against the port. Now, since we have been organizing and trying to alert the public to this issue, I'm sure that that number is probably even greater now. But add to that, polls taken consistently, at least over the last 5 years, that have shown air pollution is the #1 issue of public concern amongst Utah voters and has been consistently even during the non-winter inversion season.
Hmm.
Occasionally it's #2 and maybe drops as low as #3, but it is always in the top 3 issues of concern to Utah voters, usually #1. So you add those 2 polls together, and I think it's pretty safe to say that there is widespread public opposition to this project. Now, a lot of people are still not aware of it. We're obviously working as hard as we can to change that, and we'll take advantage of every opportunity we can to engage the media on the issue. But suffice it to say, the public doesn't want this. And it's really, at this point, being forced down our throats.
So if it's been on the #1 issue for voters for so long, perhaps having a county mayor that's against the port instead of thinking it's probably a good idea if it can be done sustainably. Got to throw the pitch in there a little bit because I've been against it from day one.
You have, and let me just say that you are a big part of the reason that we had a very clunky name when we first started. We were the Coalition for Port Reform, and you, Michael, were one of the people who helped push us to make that name a little more direct. Say what you're really about, which is stop the polluting port.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably worth also mentioning that it's no surprise to anybody, of course, that Democrats usually have more environmental concerns and awareness than Republicans do, and people from the Green Party perhaps even more so. But it is frustrating to us that when we talk to even Democratic members of the legislature and some other Democratic politicians in other positions along the Salt Lake Valley, that they often give us the resignation that it's a done deal and there's really nothing we can do about it. We don't believe that for a second. We think that if the public is really as opposed to this as we think they are, then the legislature and their powerful allies in the business community really can't push this down the throats of the public if the public really doesn't want it. And I think that's really a true reflection of the actual dynamic. So we're not resigned whatsoever that this is going to happen. And we're going to try and push those members of the legislature and those people in other offices that are relevant, like the Salt Lake City Mayor's office and so forth, into the realization that, no, we don't have to resign ourselves to this future where the inland port now dominates the landscape of the Salt Lake Valley.
Yeah. So Deeda earlier mentioned the climate crisis, right? And if we're collectively, globally, as a species, going through what appears to be the demise of our biosphere, from whatever environmental science you want to study, there is a definite downward trend in the vitality of our life's planetary life-giving systems right now. And I think broadening up the conversation might be nice a little bit. I'm of the perspective that Utah could really become, and especially Salt Lake Valley and our capital, could really be the epicenter for a lot of transformation. You know, we have a background, the majority religion has a background of a lot of hard work and resiliency and even stewardship over the natural world, and have often been leaders in some of the most important global issues. And instead of saying, hey, we're Utah, bring your business here, let's dump your nuclear waste in our gorgeous public lands, if instead we say, no, enough's enough, and we want to glorify the landscape the way that we know we can lift it up and we can work together, and we can also showcase in an urban setting the solution to our climate crisis that could be a pattern for other communities and big cities throughout the world. I really think Utah could turn on a dime if there was just the right sequence of events occurred, which is what makes me so excited to be coming into this political spectrum as a young progressive millennial and say, heck, let's try kicking the beehive a little bit and see how far we can take this vision. And so, maybe let's broaden up the conversation a little bit. What is this climate crisis, and what can we do maybe locally and kind of set the stage? I know, Brian, you've been one to be, you seem to really like our current president and his environmental policies. Let me say it that way.
Yeah, I can't get enough of his environmental destruction. I look forward to waking up every morning and seeing what sort of strokes of a stable genius he has wrought upon the public. I'd like perhaps your listeners or viewers to think a little bit about the pioneer legacy that people in Utah are fortunate enough to have. Whether you're a member of the LDS Church or not, we have a where pioneers came here under very difficult circumstances, and they built buildings and they planted orchards. They built a temple. Many of those things, those people never benefited from themselves. What they did is they planted and built a future for their descendants. Now, it would, to me, be unconscionable that we take a much different attitude towards the future of our descendants today in taking an attitude towards the environment that we're going to do everything we can to make the most amount of money today and the future be damned. Our air and water quality and an inhabitable climate, we can just discard all of those concerns. Our pioneer legacy is very much different than that. We should be prepared to take care of the one planet we have that we all depend on so that future generations can actually thrive. Right now, we're doing the opposite, and you see that in real time in the doomsday machine that's been wrought upon California, Washington, and Oregon with all the effects of the climate crisis. So for those people who come from a background of conservative politics, yet value their pioneer legacy, think about how your pioneer ancestors behaved. And that's the kind of example we should be setting.
Yeah. I really love the kind of the positive tone we're taking with this, because I know coming into a clean air discussion in the Valley can sometimes be difficult, especially for those that have been really focused on the issue for a long time. It's always important to look at what gets us up in the morning and continues that battle for a better world. Any thoughts coming up for you, Deeda, on the topic at hand?
Well, I'm really inspired by what I'm seeing young people do. And I think, as you've described it, Michael, we need to create a vision for the future that is positive and accessible, and help people to understand that we can stop the climate crisis if we do the right things. We may be a little bit too far to completely stop it, but we can definitely minimize the harm. And in doing that, we create a better quality of life for everybody. Who doesn't want clean air and clean water and beautiful natural places to explore? And, this is where we are at this moment in time is a very critical juncture where the decisions that we make now will impact human life on Earth. And also the biodiversity of our planet. We're losing species at an incredibly rapid rate, and that is not sustainable. So there is a lot of scary stuff out there, but there are also visionary people like you, Michael, who are young and energetic. And, I think together we can make a better world. We just need to keep up our work. We need to all vote. We need to get all of our friends to vote. We need to, I'm just going to say it, we cannot have Donald Trump as the president of the United States anymore. And then we can start to heal, and do the kinds of things that will give everyone a good, healthy quality of life. But the path that we're going down right now is not the right one. So we need a turn. And I think the turn comes with the energy of youth.
I think it's worth also talking a little bit about the business angle of this. If you look at what happened in a handful of other cities where ports have been developed, the dominant theme is that the jobs that have been created are very low, consistently low-paying jobs, non-union jobs, many of them part-time jobs, or are victims of this trend for companies not to actually employ anybody, but make people be their own individual contractors so they don't have to pay any benefits. Those are typically the kind of jobs that the inland port creates, combined with the fact that most of these facilities are gradually even losing those jobs due to the development of robotics. So the number of jobs that can be created for the rest of the community are actually probably very small and will become smaller in the future. Most of them will be low-paying jobs that really most of our families aren't really going to be excited to have to take those kinds of jobs. And in fact, in other communities, become employed in these warehouse jobs in other inland port cities, frequently have to go on public assistance to support themselves. So it's fallacy to think this is a tremendous economic boom. The economic benefits of this supposed economic boom will be largely limited to a handful of developers at the top. We see this as just another avenue where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and suffer all the consequences.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Very succinctly and I think very accurately put. Did I get this right on the little banner here? stopthepollutingport.org/events. Does that look
Yes.
good, Deeda?
Yes.
All right, please get involved. There are a few people that have been dedicatedly listening to this whole thing. Sign up, sign the pledge, and get involved with the updates from the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition. I think it's one of the single most important activist level campaigns and efforts that you can get behind that's going to shift the transition to the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. I want to thank you both. I also, Dr. Moench, I think it's important to let people know a little bit about Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment as well. How can they find and support you all?
We are an organization of healthcare providers, primarily physicians, but we also have even more members of the lay public. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are about 450 physicians who are part of our group, but we have also about 3,000 members of the lay public. So you do not have to be a physician to be part of our group. We are active on social media. We have at least one Facebook post that talks about current events with regard to public health, including the pandemic and pollution issues and so forth. We have a very robust website. We have had an ongoing project since our inception in 2007 to scour the world for the medical research on air pollution. And we have probably a more comprehensive database of all the research on air pollution than any other organization that I know of, even within the government and certainly amongst NGOs. I mean, I have to say, I think we deserve a little bit of a pat on the back that we have brought medical science to the forefront of this debate. And if you want to know all the gory details about the health consequences of air pollution, there is no better place in the entire world than to go to our website. So we encourage you to do that. We encourage you also to look at and listen to some of the lectures that some of us are starting to develop. I just gave a Zoom lecture to University of Utah medical students on the neurotoxicity of environmental contaminants. I'm currently trying to negotiate a way to make that available to the public. But we want to be thought of as a credible and comprehensive source of the medical research on air pollution and other environmental contaminants.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian. Thanks for the great work you're doing, and Deeda, thanks for keeping up all the momentum. I know I've been a little more out of the loop with a baby on the way and all kinds of crazy things and navigating a campaign and all the rest. But I put that in my heart and hope every day and that people get involved and we can keep shifting and moving the needle on this and other issues around our living world. I know we're about up with our hour. It was really a pleasure to spend it with both of you. And listen, for folks that are seeing my stuff about the campaign, I don't want this to just be an ongoing begging for votes or begging for donations. What's most important to me is that the values that I've chosen to dedicate myself to over the last 10 years are something that you feel inspired to follow, and that you see that a younger progressive millennial running for a big office like this is really just a cue to action. It's a cue for other people to finally get engaged in the political process, this transformative process that's going on, and to think more deeply. You might have heard about the climate crisis at this point. This isn't 20, 30, 50 years ago, but as far as the practical watching the momentum change and to see the light at the end of the tunnel and find that day-to-day hope and those connections and people like Brian and Deeda that embody that so well. I hope that somehow choosing to run and shining a light on these things is going to help move that needle for the future. So thank you all so much. If you do feel called to support my campaign, you can visit michaelthemayor.com. In my heart, I'm already the mayor, but we have another voting system to go through here. But please get involved, and thank you so much, Deeda and Brian, for being with the live stream today. I'm going to be doing this weekly until my child is born, so it might be interesting to have a little hiccups there when that happens. Little hiccups, I guess, is a cute thing to say. But next week, we'll be focusing on education. And we'll be focusing really on county issues over the coming weeks. So thank you so much, Brian and Deeda, and have a beautiful rest of your evening, okay?
Thanks, Michael.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.